Okay, good. Let's kick it off then. Let's start. Welcome everyone again. As I said at the beginning, today is the 10th edition of our GSMA Showcase live events under the title of Why Device Connectivity Depends on Network Settings. First, I would like to thank you for taking the time and effort out of your busy schedules for joining us here today. I am very pleased to welcome representatives from key ecosystem stakeholders. We are a global business, as you may probably know, so it's great to see this reflected in the location of our speakers too. Pablo and myself, we are joining from London. Shamit and Kevin are joining from the US, and Florian from Germany. For those who don't know me, my name is Nicholas Forster. I'm Outreach Director here in GSMA Services, and my primary role is to make sure our customers, partners, and members are leveraging the best of our full suite of services we have available to help the mobile industry as a whole. We have a great session today, which is focused on network settings, the aim of which is help you, your team, your company to plan more effectively, reduce cost, increase revenue, and improve your customer experience today in preparation for a 5G world tomorrow. It should describe how network settings play a crucial role in helping MNOs, MVNOs, OEMs, and I would say the whole ecosystem to achieve a seamless user experience as customers embrace 4G, VoLTE, Vi-LTE, and 5G services, switching from app to app, location to location, and voice to data. We have some great speakers today who are going to present to you and are going to talk around this topic. As a result, we have a consistent and packed agenda, with each session lasting approximately around 10-15 minutes. The first session would be from Pablo Jacopino, Head of Research and Commercial Content in GSMA Intelligence, who will provide a networks and device market status update. Then we will have Shamit Bhatt, Product Director at GSMA, who will provide an update on GSMA Network Settings Exchange, new features, and how it can help both operators and manufacturers businesses. After this session, we will have the voice of Deutsche Telekom with Florian Leon Schmidt, system engineer, who will talk about why MNOs benefits from network settings exchange. Following with the agenda, we will also have Kevin Haddad, CEO from Setar Mobile, who will provide a perspective on how MVNEs and MVNOs can also benefit from this platform, from GSMA Network Settings Exchange. At the end, we will have a Q&A sessions where we will try to address as many questions and answers as possible. And just to make you aware, this session, it is recorded and we will be able to share the content afterwards. So with that, I would like to ask you, of course, not to be shy. Put all your questions in the right-hand chat and we will address them at the end. With that, I will like to hand over to Pablo. Pablo?
Thank you, Nicolas. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to connect with all of you. I'm Pablo Jacopino, Head of Research at GSMA Intelligence. Over the next 10 minutes or so, we will be looking together at some of the important trends that are shaping the future of networks and devices and what they mean for network settings. Our mobile industry is transforming faster than ever before, and it's fair to say that the evolution of mobile devices and the networks is central to this transformation. On one side, we have a proliferation of connected devices, from the legacy devices such as smartphones, tablets, and laptops to new devices, including consumer IoT devices, devices for immersive reality. There is growing momentum for 5G fixed wireless, which brings new devices to the market, and also the IoT and enterprise space with devices for factories, for industrial settings, as well as connected vehicles. On the other side, we have new networks and new network capabilities entering the market. 5G for mobile, 5G for fixed wireless, IoT networks, private networks, new capabilities and services such as voice over LTE, video over LTE, eSIM, iSIM. So it's a complex ecosystem with new technologies and new devices entering the market. And this means that, as Nicolas said, network settings are essential to help OEMs, MNOs, MVNOs, digital services providers to deliver a fast, complete, and seamless user experience. Now, obviously, in the mobile industry, we talk a lot about, next slide, please. We talk a lot about the networks and devices, but sometimes we forget that we do that because really the objective is to deliver services for customers. So services that can use networks and devices. One of the trends that we see in the industry is that the consumers are going digital more and more, a trend accelerated by the COVID pandemic. Which means that the network settings are super important to make sure that the consumers can use networks and devices in order to get the most from digital services. Some of the trends that we see in the market is that smartphones are now the central platform for digital services. People use smartphones to have access to a range of digital services. They get subscriptions to digital services, and also 5G is raising the bar. We do a consumer survey globally, and what we see is that when we compare the behavior of 4G users with the 5G users, 5G users are more interested in adding services, devices and content to their mobile subscriptions and make greater use of digital entertainment services, video, gaming, music on their smartphones. So that means that network settings, especially in the context of smartphones, are super important to make sure that consumers can benefit from all these digital services. Next slide, please. Let's now go deeper on some of the trends that we see in the new technologies, starting with the 5G. Momentum for 5G is accelerating. As of the end of March, more than 200 operators had launched mobile 5G services. More than 60 have announced plans to launch mobile services, which means that in total, 290 operators are working on 5G across more than 100 countries. So we can say that 5G is now a global trend. What about adoption? Next slide, please. We see that adoption of 5G is faster compared to the adoption of 4G and 3G. At the end of 2022, the industry reached an important milestone, 1 billion 5G connections. That was a big number. So why is 5G adoption faster than that of previous networks? Because there is an entire ecosystem, a full ecosystem supporting 5G deployments, from devices to standards, spectrum, new use cases. And there is interest from consumers to adopt 5G. We forecast that by 2025, there will be 2.5 billion 5G connections globally. And by 2029, 5G will be the largest network technology, even bigger than 4G. Next slide, please. The arrival of 5G has also accelerated network sunsets. I'm talking about operators switching off legacy networks, 2G and 3G. What we see from this slide is that the momentum is accelerating. In fact, 2023 is expected to be the year with the highest number of 2G and 3G network sunsets, and the trend will continue in the future. And this happens across all regions, with Asia Pacific and Europe leading the way. So this means that in the future, operators will need to manage the transition to 5G, but also switching off 2G and 3G networks. And what we see is that 3G shutdowns are more popular than 2G shutdowns. And there is a reason for that. The reason is that many IoT use cases continue to use 2G. Next slide, please. When we combine momentum for 5G and the network sunsets, we see that the combination of these two trends is driving progress on voice over LTE, voice over 5G, as well as video services over 4G and 5G. At the moment, more than 300 MNOs provide the voice over LTE services globally across more than 120 countries. The trend is growing. We expect that by 2028, nearly 500 MNOs will provide voice over LTE services, which means that the service, voice over LTE, will be available pretty much in all countries in the world. Adoption of voice over LTE services is growing. We track the number of voice over LTE connections globally. We are now nearly at 4 billion, and this number will reach 6 billion by 2028, meaning that nearly 80% of 4G plus 5G connections will use voice over LTE services. The fact that the voice over LTE services are expanding means that there is a need for network settings to allow consumers to use voice over LTE services. Next slide, please. Then eSIM. eSIM is entering the market, is now mainstream, and is a global trend. Momentum is accelerating after the introduction of eSIM-only iPhones in the US. We can see that from the number of countries that are making eSIM service commercially available to customers is now more than 100, and also the number of operators supporting commercial eSIM service for smartphones, which is now higher than 300. So what does eSIM mean for network settings? Because in the future there will be a proliferation of devices that have eSIM technology. That means that the network settings are important to make sure that these devices can use networks and consumers can get the benefits of eSIM. Next slide, please. When we look at the future, we forecast that eSIM adoption will accelerate over the next couple of years, and by the end of 2030, it will be mainstream in pretty much all the markets. North America will lead the way, followed by Europe, and we forecast that by 2030, there will be 7 billion eSIM smartphone connections globally in our base case scenario. Next slide, please. So we have been talking about consumer markets. Let's talk about IoT and enterprise. There is an explosion of connections and devices in the IoT market, and enterprise use cases are driving growth. I'm talking about automotive, healthcare, utilities, manufacturing. So really enterprise is the main driver of IoT growth, and there will be nearly 6 billion cellular IoT connections by 2030. This brings a growing and diverse range of use cases that need network settings. Therefore, equally to the consumer market, also for the enterprise market, it's important that network operators, OEMs, get the most from the network settings, and there is a timely exchange of network settings. Next slide. What we see is also that private networks momentum is accelerating. This is incremental to public networks, and it means that these private networks need to have network settings in order to allow devices to be connected. There is a huge demand for private networks. Deployments are accelerating. 22% of enterprises deploying IoT need location-specific network coverage, which means it's an opportunity for private networks. And operators are one of the main contractors of private networks with 4G and 5G key technologies. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was my final slide. If you want to know more about GSMA Intelligence, please feel free to reach out at info@gsmaintelligence.com. And with that, I'll leave the floor to our next speaker. Thank you.
Just quickly before we get to the next speaker, what we'd love you to do is get involved today. We want to make this slightly interactive. So we are going to be running a couple of polls throughout the webinar, and we would love you to kind of provide your feedback. So the first poll is, how many relationships exist between your company and others where settings, we're talking obviously mobile at this point, are being shared? So if you just give us the answer, and we will share those results and see what the majority of people select, as obviously that is a key area of interest. We'll leave this up for about 30 seconds. Just to remind, in case anyone came late, that all the slides will be sent to you with the details, and to also put your questions in the Q&A tab, which you will find at the top. Any we don't have time to answer today, we will produce written answers and circulate that following the webinar. So I think that's long enough. So what we are going to do is we are going to share the results with you there. And that should hopefully is showing on the screen, but I can't see. In case anyone can't see, 56% of organizations say between 0 and 10, 20% of organizations between 10 and 20, and a quarter of organizations have 50 plus relationships. So I wonder if that will lead nicely into your area, Shamit.
Absolutely, it does. Thank you very much, Pablo, for setting the context. Let's go on to the next slide. So I'm Shamit Bhatt. I'm the product director for the Network Settings Exchange platform of the GSMA. So as part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about what NSX actually is, how it works. I'm going to share some statistics on how we are doing since the launch. We're going to talk about how you can get involved in improving the database and the platform as a whole. And finally, some of the planned enhancements. So let's start right at the top. What is this platform about? So the way we like to define it is that NSX is a single location where the operators, whether you're an MNO, MVNO, or an MVNE, you can come, put together your settings, upload them, and share it with the larger manufacturing community. And that helps the manufacturing community take your settings and ensure that devices, they are manufacturing, work seamlessly, they are fine-tuned when they arrive on the network. Next slide, please. So how does it really work? So any operator who's running a network would get their credentials on the Network Settings Exchange database. They log in, and then you can upload what we call as the TS32 file, which is a file which is created by the Terminal Steerings Group, which is one of the working groups of the GSMA. And it's a standard settings file, which is an Excel-based template, which you can add all your settings to, and then you upload it onto the database. And once it's uploaded, we run a bit of a verification process if you want to get involved with the APN verification. And post that, you are able to select through a list of OEMs who are on the platform and send your file to whoever of those OEMs you want to send the file to. Once the OEMs, get onto the database, they have the ability to download these files, and then, they'll pick and choose the files which they want to download. And once they've done that, then whenever they have the next software release, whether that's for an existing device, an old device, or a new device which they're about to launch, they'll make sure that those settings are implemented on those respective devices. And ultimately, whenever those devices land up on your network, then they would work from the word go without you having to intervene or having to do something special for those devices to work. So it's a very simple, straightforward platform. The operators provide the settings, the manufacturers download them, and then they go ahead and implement them based on their respective releases. Next slide, please. So at this point, let's have a look at how we are faring since the launch. As of last week, we had 634 manufacturers who had signed up to the system. And we have a decent usage rate amongst these manufacturers. At least 30% of them have downloaded one or more files over the last 12 months. Considering that you would not have a software release every now and then, it's something you'll plan over 6 months, 2 years, or longer periods, depending on whether it's an old or a new device. I think that's a healthy download rate. We've also seen the average number of downloads on the rise, particularly this year. You can see on an average it's 746, but just in the last 2 months, We've had more than 2,000 files being downloaded in the month of May. Last month, we had more than 1,000 files downloaded itself in just a single month. Now, in terms of the operators who are there on the system, we've got more than 140. In fact, just yesterday I checked, it was 144 in total. That includes the operators, well, they are MNOs and MVNOs. And within themselves, they have access to the TS32 file, which essentially shares or helps them share more than 170 odd settings. Now, these settings could be, their APN settings. This could be their 5G data, which is a feature which we recently brought into the system. This could be any information related to their VoLTE, IMS, and any of the core network features, whether it's 2G, 3G, 4G as well. So there are series of settings, and the way it works is that there's an Excel sheet which has multiple tabs, and each tab is dedicated to a particular technology, and all the related settings are present there. You fill in whatever you have in terms of those settings, and wherever you are not providing that setting, you could either go to a default or just leave it blank. So this kind of gives you an idea of the usage. Of course, we are focusing a lot more on further building on this ecosystem and helping operators and manufacturers both utilize the database to the maximum. And sessions such as these are another attempt on our behalf to make sure that we reach out to more and more of you and try to make sure that you understand how this settings database can help you in your business. Next slide, please. So how can you get involved and how can you help us improve the database? So recently we presented this process in the terminal steering group, wherein we said, let's come together as a community and try and help improve the platform for everybody who's involved, whether it's an operator or a manufacturer. So as per the new process, anyone who is using the database, or even if plans to use the database, can go to gsma.com or the member gateway of the GSMA. You can submit any idea you have for improving the database through the simple form, which gets sent out to a common email ID, which is nsx@gsma.com. We pick it up and then we maintain what we call as an NSX product backlog, wherein we would detail out each of the ideas which are submitted. After that, it's collectively evaluated by the terminal steering group, even by the GSMA product team. So we can help understand how this particular idea would benefit everybody. And then we prioritize on basis of multiple factors. And ultimately, it would hit somewhere on the product roadmap in terms of the next planned releases. And finally, depending on all of these factors, eventually the idea which has been submitted would be implemented. So it's a simple process which we've defined in order to make sure that you can get involved with improving the database, and it's not just left to the GSMA to think about ways in which the database can be enhanced. Of course, we will do our bits, but it always helps when the entire community gets involved in trying to make sure that the service works for you. Next slide, please. So at this point, let's talk about, what are the planned enhancements, we are going to make into the system. This year, particularly in Q4 now, we would have the latest TS32 file implemented, which is version 13. It was just approved last week, and we would get that implemented. It's got some new 5G settings, which have been included into the TS32 file. Besides that, we'll make some enhancements to the APN verification process based on our learnings from implementing this new process last November. And then we have this ongoing demand from the users of the database that there needs to be a means by which the operators and the manufacturing community can communicate with each other. So we'll build in some kind of messaging feature within the system itself, wherein you can get involved and speaking with the OEMs and asking them about a particular file. And likewise, an OEM can check with you in terms of what requires to be done in order to, implement a certain setting where they might have certain doubts before they implement them. Besides that, we keep improving our product roadmap. So, we capture as many requirements as possible. So there are certain planned UI, UX enhancements. There are some GSMA branding related changes which will be rolled in due course. And finally, we are also looking at automatedly ingesting some of the setting files directly into the OEM systems. This is something we are trying to, try out with certain OEMs, and if it becomes successful, then we'll try to roll it out for all the OEMs wherever they are interested in automating this part of the ingestion process. So that's mainly an overview of what NSX is, how we are doing in terms of the overall usage, and how you can get involved, and finally the planned enhancements. So at this point, let me give the floor to Florian, who would talk about how they are using NSX in their business. Over to you, Florian.
Yeah, thank you, Shamit. So hi everybody. First of all, next slide is good. My name is Florian. I come from Deutsche Telekom. We are a European operator having all of our footprint and networks in Europe, and our headquarters here in Germany. Yeah, and just to give a little bit of recap, we've always been very involved with this service and really actively driving it and using it. So this is really coming from the Terminal Steering Group, which is a group within the GSMA, a working group where many operators and OEMs meet and discuss all sorts of technical guidelines and standards and so on and so forth. And it really started from a discussion, I put it here, 2016, we had the first version about late customization and us agreeing on, let's say, a baseline set of settings for OEMs to implement. So we as MNOs had our wishes, right? Like what should be implemented in the devices, and every operator has their own wishes, and we were able to align on a meaningful set of settings here together with the OEMs and the MNOs. So this is really coming from the industry. Yeah, that's where it started, and it's has a lot of settings. I've outlined a few of them. So IMS settings, APN, all the different generations. Of course, 5G was added later. And the work is still ongoing. We have version 12 now, so very good to see that. And the other thing that also happened is the device settings database. That's what we called it before it was labeled NSX. It was also pushed by the industry. So it's MNOs and OEMs demanding the service. And we wrote the specifications in this terminal steering group and also approved it together with everyone. And then later, the GSMA picked up the work. They took the PRD, the reference document, and used it to launch the Network Settings Exchange service. So that happened 2019. Yeah, and ever since it's been launched, it's been growing. It's actively maintained, developed by the GSMA. And Shamit just said the numbers. So we really have like 140 MNOs, which, looking at where we're coming from, this is really super nice to see. And 630 OEMs, really like 630. Oh, wow. Okay, next slide, please. So why are we using this, or what's our part in this? So we use it for all of our networks. So adding MNOs and also a few MVNOs, we have 15 separate network settings files that we share over the service. We started this in 2019. We already share these 15 network settings since 2019, and I had a count, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, and it was 1,500 downloads accumulated over the time by OEMs. We've had some engagement from OEMs and also chipset manufacturers who reached out to us, which is very nice for us to see, which means people really also use these as a reference and implement these, and then also give us some feedback like, hey, why do you use this setting? What does that mean? Or does this really align with this and that? So yeah, classic discussions. Our target here is really the OEMs and devices that are outside of our portfolio. I mean, we are a relatively large operator. We have a quite sophisticated partnering, but still, like there's more than 600 OEMs in this service. There's no way for any partnering team to maintain that. So this is really covering our blind spot there. So all the OEMs that we don't have any sort of bilateral agreement with, they can go to the GSMA. The GSMA is well known, right? Even though they might not know us or might not know any contact person from us, they go to the GSMA and they get very good maintained network settings, not just from us, but from so many other operators. Yeah, and ever since, we are also driving this service forward in the terminal steering group and yeah, also here in the NSX. Okay, next slide, please. That is basically a screenshot just for you to see. So this is for us. This is not really a secret. So this is all the network files that we have uploaded. You can see on the right, there's this blue number indicating how many times the settings were downloaded. If this was a real service, I could also click on it and it would even show me the names. And maintaining these settings, I can just, for example, we have a new service that we're launching, or we have an old codec or an old cipher or something like that that gets deprecated. It's just a few clicks in the database and I can change the settings sheets. So the upfront work of getting it all in is a little larger, but then maintaining it is really super easy. So it's really making me a lot of less stressful days. Yeah. Okay, next slide. I have a little bit of a call to action here because Shamit already kind of highlighted it. I think this is the perfect timing for you to also start here and getting engaged, because this is not just some service that somebody's offering, but it's really taking input from the companies that are using it. So this is really coming from the MNOs and the OEMs, right? We are aligning on what we want to have in this database. And then later on, it also goes into production. And yeah, we're starting this new process that Shamit already highlighted. The day after tomorrow is our first meeting there, and we can all bring in our product ideas, our designs, and then we discuss them with the whole group, with the terminal steering group. And then we align on something, and those requests basically form the backlog for the service. So it's not just coming from, let's say, some product people. It's really coming from the people who want to use the service in the first place. Yeah, so this is kind of my call to action also to everybody here. Please yeah, get engaged and join the discussion. It's benefiting everybody here. Yeah, that would be it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And it is time for our second poll, which I think Florian has led into very nicely there. He's given some sort of use cases and how he thinks that it benefits the industry. So we're kind of interested whether you buy into that and whether you can see the advantage of having this single location to share device settings information between OEMs and MNOs. What would be very interesting is if anyone does select no, then I'd be interested to hear that viewpoint as well. But it seems like the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, I should say, do see the value in this. So I am going to close that there. You will see that 93% of you agreed. So Florian's still got a little bit more work to convince those final 7%, but we're nearly there. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Kevin. Thank you.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon. I'm Kevin Haddad, CEO of Star Mobile. Background on our company, we've been in business for 20 years, and our major focus is enabling other MVNO and brands to launch their own services. We started here in the United States about 20 years ago with national retailer 7-Eleven, and we grew that to other national retailer with their own private label. We also launched other folks with their own brand direct-to-consumer offers. We work with multiple carriers, including AT&T, Rogers, T-Mobile, and others around the world. With these partnerships, we're enabling our customers to launch wireless service directly to their consumers. Next slide, please. The previous one, I'm sorry. Okay, there's a slide missing, but it's okay. Let's move on to the next one. Sorry about that. So the idea here, what attracted us to the GSMA partner, the exchange, is really to create a frictionless opportunity for our consumer. When they bring devices to our brands or our retail customers or to us with direct to consumer, is to be able to offer them a service that is less frustrations, less frictions for them to onboard them directly onto the brand. That will allow us to not to have to deal with multiple hundreds of devices, because bring your own devices is a reality in the mobile services. Everyone have a different device they want to choose. They buy it from different options. Mom and dad give it to their kids, and they want to bring these devices to us or our partners for us, and be able to offer that on a multiple carriers and multiple channels is a critical area that reduce that friction, and be able to onboard that customer quickly to it. There's no tolerance for consumers anymore that they have to do more things in order to join a programs or a service or a brand. Some of the obstacle that we experienced before when they brought their own devices, that we have to work with multiple OEMs in order to put our provisioning our own services from the carriers that we're getting. We have our own APNs or our own MMS access. So those areas created those frustration. So increasing some of the areas like MMS or group messaging, loss of tethering to their devices. Some devices carry like an Android devices, there's multiple configuration of it, multiple implementation by different carriers that see fit. Those areas are critical to keep that. Also, the like for the device that we like with GSMA, when we got introduced to the GSMA through our Apple relationship. They thought there's a great opportunity for us to get into the program, be able to offer it to customers who bring their own devices directly to some of our brands who don't have a direct relationship with Apple. So that created the environment. The introduction was quick. We onboarded. We'd be able to put that files and from previous the files that we added in there, we had to ask for help from the carriers because certain configuration that required the carrier, because we depend on the network. We don't own our own network. Depending on the network configurations, we were able to get our carriers to input those into the profile, load the files. After we've done that, it was easy. We onboarded on a lot of OEMs. And we're working toward the end of this year to have some implementation on one of our core OEM to have the configuration up and running and touted, including Apple. So those are great opportunity, great stride in what the GSMA has done with this. Next slide, please. So the benefits to the OEM, I was trying to focus on that. One is an area where you have a lot of ask, a lot of input, not just from the major carriers, the MNOs, but also from a lot of the MVNOs are trying to target a specific segments or specific groups and certain configuration that is required on the device. This reduces the cost basically for the OEM. That's the benefit from having the exchange in one spot where you load the configuration, it's done, it's tested and up and running. And like we talked about from a carrier perspective or supported from the MNOs, they don't have to do a lot of that work, which require every device to come in to test it or do any of those things. It reduces also the operational impacts to us and also our MVNOs, where they have to do a lot more customer care in order to provision those devices and make them available for multiple features and functions that are provided through the device. There's a lot of features that have moved to more device-centric than a carrier-centric. Those features and function need to work and operate seamlessly to the consumer to be able to enjoy. So a lot of open to the OEM, it opened a new ventures, especially for less known OEMs, to open new ventures for them to get to direct to consumer offers, where the customer could buy that device, bring it to any MNOs and MVNOs on the market to be able to enhance it with it. This is beside the IoT type of devices and functionality under the standardized template that the GSM has done is fantastic, and I welcome the improvement onto it. From our experience with it, it has been a few times we have to input it, and we figure it out from early on. But I think automating that and automating the input from the MNOs, which a lot deals with specifically for MVNOs, it will allow them to have a lot of these functions already set into a basic template directly on the database. Network settings also published on current and future devices is a critical area. As an evolutionary things happens and devices improve and features and functions comes into it, it'll become critical area. Next slide, please. So some of our, we've used a lot of the service from GSMA, including device validation, figuring out if the device works on multiple networks that we have. We need to validate which device fits where. Those are critical areas. And I welcome the idea of expanding kind of the platform could have additional features in it, including some roaming services that attach to it, especially for MVNOs. If we have multiple carriers, multiple access, and people, we're back again traveling and doing a lot more things with it. It's an opportunity to allow additional services in a centralized location that people agree to an exchange, basically that's sitting there, allow us to roam specific functions attached to it. You could land anywhere and be able to join any network you wish, especially with the eSIM functionality and managing that on multiple levels. So having one location, starting with configuration for this exchange or an eSIM function that adds to it, that adds a huge value for us. We welcome that greatly, and our MVNO welcome the functionality that allow them to enable those consumer that are coming to their brand that they're advertising and promoting, because they're smaller but nimble, have a marketing and or a targeted segment that they're approaching. So yeah, the experience is important to be on par with the carrier experience who have direct access to buying a large number of devices. So we're trying to make it more democratize the approach and the convenience for the customer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all the speakers for such great presentations. Thank you, Shamit. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Kevin. First, to the audience, I would like to thank you, as I said before, for taking the time and effort out of your busy schedules for joining us today. Again, please remind that we will share the video and the content online afterwards. With that, I would like now to take these last minutes of this session for any questions the audience might have. Please also remind while we take these questions that we would like to give you the chance, the opportunity to connect directly with our team. So if you like us to contact you, please select that on the poll. So for anyone that is still online, do you have any questions? I think I have some here. First question for you, Shamit. Can you give examples on how big and small operators are taking benefits from the service?
Sure, Nico. Now, I think it's important to understand that, as rightly pointed out in several presentations today, that it's practically impossible for a single operator to have 1,000 odd or so many connections, and we saw that through the poll as well. But for a consumer, they expect seamless services to be provided. And the only way forward is to somehow centralize the exchange of the settings. And we saw examples where, Florian talked about how DT has benefited from this to cover the blind spots, as he mentioned, and likewise, even with Kevin's case, there are certain relations which will be highly improbable if it were not for the NSX. Now, besides that, I can see that we've had a lot of success stories with smaller operators and bigger operators. Particularly, we had a recent case with Giptel, Transtel, wherein they have benefited from the platform. Particularly in case of Giptel, they had some good success with Sony. In case of Transtel, they again had success with some big OEMs. So there are a lot of these stories which keep coming up. Now, our initial focus was to set up this ecosystem, right? So we wanted to get that piece correct. We wanted to have enough manufacturers. We wanted to have enough operators onto the network. Now that first phase is more or less successful, wherein we have been able to bring together that basic ecosystem. Of course, we continue to push and we continue to grow. Now at this next stage, what we are trying to do is to try to see how we can improve the engagement between the community, wherein we ourselves are trying to get operators in touch, put them in touch with the manufacturers, and then help be that bridge. And some of the enhancements we are going to bring in is also only going to help enable that communication between the two sides. So we can see that there are operators who are already benefiting, which is smaller or the bigger operators, but there's a lot more we can do, which we're trying to enable either through promotional activities such as these, or having the communication bridge between the community.
Great, thank you, Shamit. One question for Florian. How do you manage urgent requirements when they are not part of the NSX dataset?
Yeah. So very good question. So in the TS32, of course, it's a fixed set, right? So if there is something that you need to be configured that is not part of that, there is like a supplementary settings, which is basically a free text field. You can use that for your own special settings. But also, I want to highlight, you can also bring it to the group, of course. I mean, it might be more like the midterm solution, but maybe other operators also find some interest in that. It could be interesting for everybody. So I always encourage bringing your settings also to everybody and then discuss them in the group. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I think I have some questions for Pablo. First one, are operators making progress on monetizing their 5G network investment?
Really good question. So we did some analysis recently. In the consumer market, what we see is that the countries such as China, Japan, South Korea, Australia are making progress with 5G monetization, meaning that before 5G, the mobile ARPU in those countries was declining, and after the launch of 5G, there has been an inversion of the trend, meaning that mobile ARPU is now growing in those countries. There are different factors, but definitely 5G is one of the big drivers. In Europe, we don't see the same trend. And then when it comes to the enterprise markets, operators are monetizing 5G through B2B propositions and private networks. And again, China is a good example of a country making progress on monetizing 5G.
Great. And one more for you, Pablo. How is eSIM adoption in the smartphone market going? How would you describe that?
Okay, so in the US, adoption is now double digit thanks to the launch of eSIM only iPhones by Apple in September. So US is the number one in terms of adoption of eSIM. The other countries are still below, low single digit adoption in Europe. In China, the service is not available. So it will take some time to see the transition to eSIM. It will take a few years, but US is leading and the other countries are behind.
Brilliant. And I have one for Kevin. What challenges, if any, you experience in filling out the forms or submitting the forms?
I think the network settings was a critical area that the network operator has to be engaged in order to input into that. So I think what Shamil was talking about, improvement into it, where the network operator could have those primary settings in there, and the MVNOs or additional providers, they could select their own specific area into it. That'll be helpful because it's standardized across a lot of the MVNO, those carriers. But overall, it was a pleasant experience to onboard into it. Overall, it was challenging at certain times, but we're knocking some doors, so it's okay to open those doors. Sometimes you have to push through. So, but it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Okay, if there are no more questions, I would like to say thank you to the audience. Hope you found this session of interest and valuable. As we said, the GSMA Showcase Live sessions are a series of webinars that we are doing to try to help you around the different solutions that we provide in GSMA services and related to the mobile industry hottest topics. So with that, thanks again. Have a great day and hopefully speak soon. Bye.